All right, here we are, another episode of Digging Deeper. I'm so thankful that you're here. Want to remind you to check out what's going on at Not a Needy Person. We're helping so many people over there through your generosity, pointing other people there who are interested in giving to a cause where 100% of the donations go to the need that is being donated towards. So please check it out at notaneedyperson.org. On my last video, I was talking about the issue of when we put God on trial, and the passage I used was Romans chapter 9, talking about the issue of predestination and God's election of some people and not others, because that passage was a sticking point for me when I first came across the issue of God's sovereignty in a way that I really had to struggle with. And honestly, the instigating factor in that situation was dealing with the salvation of a loved one who I thought perhaps was not a believer. And what if they died and were not God's elect, according to the standard definitions that you hear? How was I going to handle that? And how was I going to reconcile my faith with the fact that God did not choose them? Well, that's what perpetuated my crisis, where I had to dig into this issue of God's sovereignty. And I want to talk to you today about where I've landed and how an understanding and acceptance of God's sovereignty has really become a comfort and a strength and a power in my life. Now, what do we mean when we talk about God's sovereignty? Well, there are varying definitions out there, some that you'll hear that are very expansive and broad, and some that are very narrow, in a sense, limiting God's sovereignty to certain realms. My definition is one of the broader ones. I believe that sovereignty, when it comes to speaking of God, means God is absolutely in control of everything. Let me say that again. God is absolutely, that's a powerful word, a broad word. He's absolutely in control of everything. And he is in that control from a loving perspective, out of his wisdom, out of his omniscience, out of his discernment, out of his plan, his purpose, his capacity, and his competence. All of those things go into God's plan for all of eternity, not just human history. You see, God is so sovereign, he's so in control, that he's got plans far beyond what we can see. He's got purposes that extend into the realm of spiritual beings. You read Ephesians 3, and it tells us he is demonstrating his manifold witness to principalities and powers, authorities in the heavenly realms, through us, the church. So there's more going on there behind the scenes than we are privy to. And having all that in mind, we're able to kind of understand that our God, the one who has condescended to come to the earth and make himself available to us through faith in his Son, Jesus Christ, is the same one who's spinning galaxies and running everything down to the microscopic sub-DNA level. Now, if that's who our God is, what does that do for us in our heart of hearts? How do you respond to that? Well, some people get really up in arms about that, and I haven't quite understood this. I think sometimes it's just a sense of taking away something from them is what they feel, that their ability to set their own course, to call the shots, to be in control themselves is somehow diminished. And I get that. Because absolutely, if you understand that God is sovereign, you're going to recognize you are not as in control as you might have thought you were. But I also think there might be a system or a theological perspective that they hold that is being threatened. Something like free will, and man's ability to choose for himself and that sort of thing. We're not getting deeply into that subject on this particular topic. But those are the kinds of things I think that sometimes push people to push back against this idea of God being sovereign. But let me just walk through real quickly some of the benefits that I've seen in my own life when I totally submit to and joyfully accept this idea of God's sovereignty. First of all, God's promises become entirely reliable to me, and it enables me to live my life in a much more confident and secure manner based on what God has said in his word. Let me just walk this out for you. If God is entirely in control of everything, and he makes you a promise, then what does that mean? Well, it means you can count on that promise because the God who promised it is in control and nothing is going to thwart him being able to get that thing done. Theologian R.C. Sproul, who's now passed on and is in the Lord's presence, once said this. He said, if there is even one maverick molecule in the universe, one molecule running loose outside the scope of God's sovereign ordination, we cannot have the slightest confidence that any promise God has ever made about the future will come to pass. Do you see what he's saying? When we know that God is entirely in control, then his promises become real to us and we can actively move forward in faith. Faith being that we're trusting God, that what he said is true, and take action in areas where we know he is going to work. Areas like his promise to conform us to the image of Christ. Well, we can participate in that in an aggressive, intentional way because we know God is going to use our effort as part of his process to bring that about. When we have times of trouble and distress and hardship, we can remind ourselves the promises of God about I will never leave you and forsake you. My strength is perfected in weakness. All of those different things, and we can put ourselves in a place of greater faith and trust in our God because his promises are true. When we see that the scripture says he will one day take us to heaven, or when we pass away, we will be in his presence immediately. We can have great peace facing death. We can have great peace facing a dangerous circumstance, maybe that's life-threatening or physical, like a surgery. We can have great comfort knowing that the God who promised us heaven when we die is the same God who controls all things. There's no doubt he's going to do what he says he's going to do. And friends, here's another thing in this category of his promises being reliable that we can lean on. We can know that all the craziness that we see happening in the world, all the conspiracies we hear about, government control, censorship, all the behind-the-scenes plans that are going on, we can have confidence that none of that is obscured to God. None of it is outside his control. He is going to win history in time. That is a tremendous comfort that we have. Now, another comfort that we can have from this issue of God's sovereignty kind of spins out of that one, and that is that the world is never out of control. It may feel that way to us sometimes, whether it's the circumstances of our individual lives or the situations that are going on in our culture or our country. It can feel out of control, but the world is never out of control because God, the good creator who fashioned it all and spun it all into motion and is intimately involved in the details of it, is controlling every event, every person, every political leader, every movement. He is directing them for his good purposes. Friends, think that one through. The things that concern you, the movements that are on the opposing side of your political views, the things that are out there as contentious or stirring up trouble in a culture or a society, those things don't have to be so alarming to us when we recognize our God is using even that to bring about his good plan in the world. It doesn't mean we sit on our hands if there's something to be done from a Christian works sort of a perspective. But it does mean we can do that work with more confidence, knowing God will use us to accomplish his purposes through this whole conflict or tension that's going on. Think about this in terms of abuses that you may have experienced, injustice that's been done to you or yours, wars, viruses, policies, censorship. All of those things are within the hand of our God. He's holding them up. He is using them for his purposes, and none of it gets outside of his control. It is such a comfort to know that though we live in a world that feels crazy at times, our God is entirely in control. Another topic related to this issue of comfort derived from God's sovereignty is that disappointments we experience can become sources of great contentment. Now, that may sound kind of oxymoronic to you because disappointments typically are situations where we don't feel very content. We're not satisfied or happy with what's come about. But friends, the reality is, if something happens in our life that was disappointing, that happening came through the hands of our good and loving God. His plan for us, which is good, included events happening in such a way that this disappointment came into our lives. Let's just take some examples. Say you came down with a sickness instead of being able to go on vacation, and so you weren't able to go. Or your application to your first choice college was rejected. I mean, of all the things that we can pin our hopes on in this world, God is in control of them all. And in this way, in a sense, there's no way in which we make mistakes. We may be unwise, we may make bad choices, we may move down a wrong path, but God, because He's God, can use and does use all of those things to bring about His good purposes, which includes us being perfected into the image of Christ in time as His followers. Friends, disappointments don't have to be disappointing anymore. They can be areas where we take great contentment in the fact that in spite of it not working out the way we thought it would or wanted it to, our God is in control and we can rest in that. We can be at peace. You can also understand from God's sovereignty that flukes and inconveniences become growth opportunities. I mean, think about just the random things, or we call them random things, but the things that happen in life that you really wonder what that was all about. You know, like you're on your way home, it's your son's birthday, you're running late already, and you get a flat on the freeway. I mean, what was that all about? You didn't talk to anybody while you were there. You didn't see any good come about, and then you're late for the birthday. Why does God have those things happen? Well, friends, those flukes and inconveniences can be growth opportunities for us. It's an opportunity for us to rest even in that moment of frustration. Take that deep breath, let off all the steam, and tell our God, hey, I trust you. I know you're good. I don't need to be stressed about this. I can relax. I can let you be in control while I fix this flat tire and get me home for my son's birthday in time. Do you see, friends, the minor inconveniences of life that can become such a frustration and such a stress to us don't have to be stressful or of concern anymore when we rest in the fact that our God is sovereign and is in control. The last example, and I'm sure there are hundreds more, of repercussions that come about in our lives in a good way from knowing that God is sovereign. But the last one here is one I had asked my wife about. What is one of the comforts she receives from knowing that God is sovereign? And she said, true peace is found in knowing God is sovereign. You see, we don't have to fret and worry about things when we know that our God, who loves us and has committed Himself to us and is working for our good, is actually in control. We can have peace. We can have comfort. Fear can be a thing of the past. All the times that Jesus tells us, do not fear, do not be afraid, have good courage, all those things make sense in light of the reality that our God is sovereign. Friends, I hope that as I wrap up here, you don't feel I'm trying to win you over to some theological perspective. That's not the case at all. I have no horse in this race. I'm just sharing with you my experience as I've read what the Bible says and have taken it to heart and have tried to apply it in my life. These things have come about, these blessings from understanding and embracing the sovereignty of God. I would love to hear what sovereignty and understanding of it has done for you, how it has blessed your life and helped you to grow as a follower of Christ. Please leave a comment. Send me an email, Carrie@carriegreen.com. I would love to hear from you.